I think growing up, seeing an Asian male was very rare.
Some mostly Caucasian people.
Blonde hair and blue eyes, and that's what I saw, and that's what I was taught was beautiful. So until my like 30s or 40s, I'd look in the mirror and kind of just like wasn't sure who I was seeing.
In mainstream media, whenever there's a dude, they're usually straight. And whenever there happens to be a gay person or a gay couple, they're usually white. There are so many problems with gay media too, in which like they only promote one body type. They promote white gay cis men only. As someone who's Asian and as someone that's also gay, like you feel like you can't win with anywhere, really.
I moved to North America from the Philippines when I was 3 years old. As much as I would like to say, I haven't been influenced by what's been around me and the media and how culture shapes you. It's hard not to.
Let's talk about what effect this has on the Asian American community at large. First off, when you don't see yourself represented on screen, this discourages young Asian talent from getting into the biz in the first place, perpetuating the issue of talent rising up even further. Second off, seeing yourself and your story represented is huge.
So what are Hollywood's fun excuses for whitewashing movies? A lot of execs choose the popular financial excuse that there aren't enough Asian stars to lead big productions, and they need those white stars to make back their giant budgets. It's not that they're racist, it's that everyone else is racist. For example, Rupert Sanders, the director of Ghost in the Shell, said the reason why he cast Scarlett Johansson as a Japanese character and then used CGI to make her look more Asian is because she's the best actress of her generation. And then Max Landis, the screenwriter of that same movie, said, there are no A-list female Asian celebrities right now on an international level. I wonder why that is. The catch-22 of these arguments is that by and large, Hollywood as a system chooses who they make stars. For example, Scarlett Johansson found opportunity in smaller roles, then bigger roles in smaller movies, then leading roles, and then blockbusters. Roles get you roles.
Name a famous Asian American male on TV or in the media.
Oh god, Bruce Lee.
Jackie Chan.
Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan.
Bruce Lee is an Asian American legend, but he's been dead since the 70s and Jackie Chan isn't even American. The truth of the matter is, there is a lack of Asian American men who play lead roles.
Because we're raised within a framework of Western beauty standards, society often characterizes non-white features as different or unattractive. In fact, kids of all racial backgrounds up to age 10 or 11 are proven to be wildly inconsistent about their criteria for attractiveness and how it relates to race. Our use of race to classify individuals actually increases as we grow older, and it traditionally favors, drumroll please, white people.
The geek, the social outcast, the freak.
Like nerdy or like smart.
Sexless. Like, I mean, talk about like neutering a male.
3 top stereotypes that we found in our study for Asian American men are being good at math, having small genitalia, and being good at computers.
And while the information he gathered was far from being scientific, it gives us an insight on the Asian American man.
Even though these microaggressions are supposedly small and subtle and minuscule, they really do have an impact on people's lives. If you experience a microaggression so often because of your race, perhaps you might not like being part of your race.
With media in this country, because it has been predominantly white, and I get like, you know, I'm sure like some people are like, stop talking about not being white. But when you're not the majority in it, you have to have that visibility just so you can show people like, it's not the only option. If you like that, great, but like, it can't be the only thing you see.
Where did the stereotype stem from? It's not exactly clear.
I do know that there are ways that it has been just perpetuated and maintained throughout history. In the 1920s, when Asian people were newish to this country, at least in larger numbers, there were a lot of media articles about Asian men stealing white women, raping them.
The term was called yellow peril, where Asian men were seen as primitive, dangerous madmen.
Part of that has stayed over time. Perhaps there needed to be these messages that were conveyed through the media, consciously or not, to keep Asian Americans in their place.
Why do you think Asian men aren't considered sexy?
It's the result of effectively a historical campaign. I mean, you know, Asian immigrants first started coming to this country. Everything from political cartoons, obviously government policy, was all about kind of framing Asians as almost bestial vermin. And, you know, women were kind of pushed in one direction as sort of over-sexualized, exotic, and men, meanwhile, were pushed into this corner of neutered eunuchs, you know, with tiny bodies and
barbaric tendencies.
Tiny bodies.
It's like the opposite of what was purported as like the Western ideal of gender norms, right?
Stereotypes can be used to keep people in place, but so is lack of representation. In Hollywood, it can be seen as a white actor portraying a caricature of an Asian man, like Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, or Jet Li portraying Romeo in Romeo Must Die, but not even once did he kiss Juliet on film.
Asian men felt that there was a lack of representation in the media, and they also felt that Asian men were typically not portrayed as attractive romantic partners. About half of Asian men have experienced someone saying in their presence they don't date Asian men.
The lack of Asian American lead roles, combined with white savior movies like Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai or Matt Damon in The Great Wall, perpetuates this emasculization of the Asian man.
How does racism manifest in the world of LGBTQ relationships? Well, to answer that question, we brought in my friend Dylan Marin.
Well, Francesca, the answer is not all that differently. If you've ever used a dating app like Grindr, Scruff, Tinder, OkCupid, Bumble, or let's be real, Twitter DMs, you've likely read something like this. Ugh, I'm sorry, I'm only into white guys. No fats, no femmes, no Asians. Well, not into black guys, just a preference. Well, we know racism on dating apps impacts people of all sexualities and gender expressions. I can tell you that this is a particular problem among gay men, because even though gay men themselves belong to a marginalized community, they can, and often do, perpetuate the oppression of others.
No fats, no femmes, no Asians, da da da.
No fat people, no feminine people, no Asians.
So, you know, fats, femmes, Asians, like you were named. You were outright named. Like, don't even bother.
I downloaded Grindr for the first time, and like being exposed to no Asians, no fats, no femmes, it was very overwhelming. One of my friends who I was talking to at the time was just like, don't download Grindr, it's gonna ruin your life. And to be honest, it kind of did ruin my life because I felt really insecure. And I'm like, wow, this is what being gay and Asian is like. Where do I fit in?
Is negative in a way where I feel objectified, personally, or fetishized.
When we use the apps, we never understand what other people's experiences are like when they use the apps. So what we get, especially when it's our first time, we often think that that's totally normal, right? That's totally okay. The gay Asian male stereotype is typically feminine, skinny, very prissy, right? Slanted eyes, smooth, hairless skin.
When it comes to dating a guy, how from experience they've immediately just been called a rice queen just because they're dating an Asian guy. And no matter whether it's just one Asian guy or just like consistently they're dating Asian guys, I suppose that's what the term is for. I guess that just falls into the whole fetishizing category as well.
Racial generalizations can also impact the language we use when we do choose to interact with each other. Exotifying people of color due to their race or background is commonplace on dating apps. Some people are looking for a Papi Chulo, or a rice queen, or a DL thug, but this language is dehumanizing and reduces people to social stereotypes. It buys into a toxic tradition of racism by assuming whiteness is the norm and turning a person's identity into a fetish, essentially making them feel like an oddity or a rare find.
When a guy says he's a rice queen, I immediately roll my eyes. I can attract you with this, but then what about my personality? Oh no!
There's a really interesting valley we're discussing where the two peaks for Asian male attractiveness these days is like really strong virile masculinity or really specifically designed femininity. But this valley of what we might call, in a layman's way, the average Asian American male is never really spoken to. And what's interesting is I feel like the average male in other cultures, specifically, let's say with white American culture, is constantly spoken to. Like the idea of being an average Joe is literally almost a badge of honor.
You even see more diversity of size and shape and so forth among African American Hispanic actors, at least in comedies, right? If you are an Asian lead, you almost have to be super hot.
Which when that trickles down, what does it say for the young Asian American male who's considered more average looking? It automatically makes you subpar to the national average outside of your race.
Henry Golding, Zayn Malik, or you work in IT. There's no middle. You know how there's a whole class of white dudes of just like schlubby dudes who went to high school with me, but now made it in showbiz? There's no like that. You gotta have like the V-taper in your abs if you're gonna be Asian. And you gotta be like Daniel Day Kim. Have you seen that photo where he flexes his pecs like this and he can hold the pencil? You gotta be Daniel Day Kim ripped. Like you can't ever have bread or cereal.
Like the perfect six-pack, muscular, like abs that's highly unattainable. The perfect coiffed hair, blonde or brunette. Colored eyes, like blue, green, particularly white, I would say, would be the dominant like characteristics of what the ideal gay is. That's also is heavily represented.
I started to sort of like take on like, oh, is there something wrong with me? Like, is there something about myself that I should be ashamed of when I'm interacting with these guys? Like, it just sort of like opened my eyes to a hierarchy that I wasn't sort of participating in before.
You almost put like the white man on a pedestal because you're like fed into this media, and it definitely is the lack of representation of gay men in color or like queer people of color in like media. I think it's like you're attracted to the white man because
you were programmed to.
That's what you saw as the ideal partner.
My white friends, oh my God, the number of messages they would get is just like insane. It's crazy.
Everyone.
We think it's offensive when like white men on their Grindr profiles have not into Asians.
Yeah.
But is there, as Asian men, we're also not into Asians.
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with like growing up in like a Western society when there weren't many people of color in like
media.
Like especially gay people of color were sort of a thing while I was growing up.
As LGBT people of color, it hurts us more when it comes from people within our community because we expect a level of empathy.
Like everybody else is shitty to us.
Yeah.
Why do you have to be shitty to us?
So-
I play this game when I pick up like the Out magazine or the Advocate magazine. How many pages do I have to flip to get to a black guy?
Totally.
And sometimes you're like, oh, and then one time I did it with Out magazine. There was one black guy, and it was for an HIV medication. Good night. It was like, and then you could go through an entire and never see an Asian person, never see an Indian person. So the prevalent image of what is attractive and what guys go for and what they're interested in is this.
Right.
You know? And this is great, but it's not the whole story.
Right, of course.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
If our stereotypes about race are proven to be learned, and those stereotypes are shown to influence our attraction to others, it stands to reason that when you're generalizing about race, particularly on dating apps, your preferences are actually the product of an environment that normalizes racism. Man, math is scary. And simply knowing that might not be enough. A 2011 study in Australia that included gay and bisexual men found that sexual discrimination was linked to racial stereotypes rather than inherent preferences. But they also found that even men with diverse attitudes were remarkably tolerant of sexual racism. Some modes of discrimination have become so ingrained in gay culture we don't even notice when we're complicit in perpetuating them.
Is our preference really just our preference, right? Or is our preference completely shaped by media and media representation around us? A lot of queer Asian men operate in the sense that it's to be picked rather than to pick.
And they're like, Joel, you don't know these people. Like, aren't you worried that one of them could murder you? And it's like, yeah, that's a pretty big draw for me, honestly. Because my thing is, if I've been murdered, I've still been picked.
In fact, a recent survey of over 850 gay men of color in the UK shows that more than 2/3 of individuals who identified as Black, Asian, South Asian, or mixed race reported encountering racism on gay dating apps. Consider this. If someone came up to you in person and just as they opened their mouth, you were like, sorry, not into Asians, you'd probably be called a jerk or at least get a drink thrown in your face. So why should we excuse those who do it online?
If you don't put no Asians in your profile, that doesn't mean you have to fuck Asians now. It just means that I don't have to see it.
More representation for queer Asian men as protagonists in movies. Doesn't even have to be a movie about love, right? It could just be a movie about life, a coming of age. And when it comes to romance, it doesn't have to always be with a white person. It could be with a Black person, Hispanic individual, another Asian person. And I think we need that diversity to allow people to see what the future potentially can be.
Look, as Fariha said earlier, Asians make up less than 1% of Hollywood roles, but 5% of the American population. So if we were even close to proportional, there would be 5 times as many Asians in the media.
I mean, it has to be a conscious choice. That's why what's becoming with network television is like when they have like a roster of programming that's all white people, or it's becoming glaring now.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that was
I
your
will
corporate
watch that
decision.
show half the time
Yeah,
if
but
it's
that's
only white
become your
people.
corporate decision.
Yeah.
It's like we know your whole corporate philosophy from looking at that.
Yeah.
And when you see a network television show that is diverse, that was a corporate decision.
Right. Yeah.
The Suits decided that's what we want to look like, and that's what we want this universe to look like.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like,
Yeah.
so it is a conscious decision.
What I really encourage, especially a lot of viewers out there, is to not be as reactive like everyone is, but be more responsive. Like if you see something where you want to see more Asian American men in media, sometimes it's not just the actors. You have to find out who the executive producers are on a project. You have to find out who's the writer. Like there's so many different things at play that shape the idea of what's being told to young people in entertainment, in politics, in media, that you can't just center on the image of someone.
Media is meant to reflect society, but also kind of push it in some sort of direction. I've said this before, I never really got into film because I never saw myself represented. I didn't realize it, but I think that's really what happened, and that's kind of why I'm doing a lot of stuff like online now, is because like this is where I can represent myself, and this is where I can see myself being represented.
When you have a minority leading actor, the story is told from that vantage point. We don't have that opportunity to tell that story from the Asian American vantage point or the Asian vantage point in Hollywood films. So we've got a ways to go yet, but we've made tremendous progress.